Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America. Great to have you with us on the program today. Of course, the website, thisweekinamerica.us. Back with us on the program, Julia Schopick is a patient advocate, health writer, and creator of the award-winning blog HonestMedicine.com, the author of the Amazon best-selling book Honest Medicine, Effective, Time-Tested, Inexpensive Treatments for Life-Threatening Diseases. Julia coaches patients on how to approach their doctors about a treatment they don't know anything about. She had that experience, and she's back with us on the program. Julia, welcome back to the show.
Rick, you know I'm happy to be back. You are just one of the best
Well, and you're very
interviewers.
kind, and you are a guest that brings such valuable information. And I'm reading that, you like to take these ideas to people who don't know and talking to doctors that don't know. You really had this problem. And if you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, you can see and hear the past interviews that we've done with Julia on the program. Basically, her husband, Tim, was diagnosed with a brain tumor, a cancerous brain tumor in 1990. He survived for 15 years post-diagnosis. That's 12 years beyond what the doctor said was going to be the life expectancy, basically due to innovative treatments that Julia found for him. And that's what we'll talk about and pick up and talk about it on the program today. That's what she talks about in her best-selling book, Honest Medicine, Effective, Time-Tested, Inexpensive Treatments for Life-Threatening Diseases. Julia Schopick, our guest on the program. Her last name spelling is Schopick. Before we start picking up with the story and talk about that, I understand that being an advocate, a medical advocate, really is something that runs in your family. Talk about your grandparents, because this goes back years and years ago where your grandmother extended her life by not taking, you've got cancer, you're not going to live for an answer.
Oh, thank you for asking that, Rick, because I don't think anyone else has asked that, and I've been on hundreds of radio shows.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it actually shows where you got this from, and your grandparents were such motivating people. Talk about their story.
Okay, it is a wonderful story, and I want to start by saying that this all that I'm telling you about happened when my mother was 11 years old. So when Dr. Charles Mayo told my grandma Julia, I was named for her, that she had 6 months to live, this would have left my mother without a mother at 11. But luckily, my grandpa was I think I get my researching life from Grandpa Turret's, because he sort of said, and he said it like hell she does. I hope it was okay for me to swear, because he he really said this is not going to happen. No. And he was one of the founders of a newspaper which is still in existence called the Jewish Daily Forwards, spelled forward in English. And my grandfather got it in Yiddish. He was, from Russia originally. And there was a column in the Jewish Daily Forwards by a doctor named Dr. Chmielnicki. And I think I'm pronouncing it right.
Well, I was going to let you try that. I'm not even going there. That sounds fine with me. We'll assume that's correct and go forward from there.
I think it is correct. That's, my mom is 98, and she says it's Dr. Chmielnicki. And by the way, what I didn't say is that it was Dr. Charles Mayo that told my mother that she had 6 months to live. So this is the background of the story.
And that is the Dr. Charles Mayo. She goes off to the Mayo Clinic hoping to get some better news than what she was getting locally.
Yes.
And Dr. Mayo is basically saying, yeah, the diagnosis is correct.
He opened her up, closed her up, and said, I think he said it to my grandfather, she has 6 months to live. And my grandfather, as I just said like hell, this is not going to happen. And he consulted Dr. Chmielnicki from the Jewish Daily Forwards, and Dr. Chmielnicki told him about a treatment in Frankfurt am Main in Germany. And he told him that he thought that my grandmother, it would really work quite well on my grandmother. So my uncle Marco spoke German, and he and my grandmother took the boat to Germany. This was before Hitler, by the way, as you could tell from the first part of my story.
Yes.
We are Jewish. And they went to Frankfurt am Main, Germany. And my mom, when my grandma Julia came back, by the way, she got this. You're going to love this. Your listeners will love it. Do you know the treatment that she got in Germany that was experimental at the time?
No.
Was radiation.
Wow.
I know. It was not done in this country. And the interesting thing is, if you go to honestmedicine.com, and if anybody wants a link to the story as I tell it, they can write to me at julia@honestmedicine.com. You'll see one of the comments says that in the article, it says that my grandmother was given radiation, but with, I believe it was oxygen. And that isn't even
Oh,
done.
yes. Yeah. I do remember reading that now. It was sort of a percentage of oxygen, I believe?
Yes. And because I wanted to make that clear, because when she came back to the United States, my mother said she had never seen my grandmother looking so well. Now, as you know, after people have undergone radiation in this country, they don't look so hot, right?
Right.
But Grandma Julia looked really, really healthy and good. And the best part of this story is that she ended up living another 11 years, making it so that my mother was now 22 when her mother died. And the best part, the part my mother still loves telling about, my mother, as I said, is 98. She said she outlived Dr. Mayo, and she sent him holiday cards every year until he died. And she just gets the biggest kick out of telling.
Well, your grandmother comes back and what goes to the doctors in New York, and they're sort of embarrassed. It's like, what do they know over there that we don't? They were able to do something that we were not able to do. And you talk in the blog that you wrote, and again, that's available at Honest Medicine, the website honestmedicine.com. That 11 years with your mother, that by that time she was 22 and your grandmother had passed, your mother went through college, graduate school. She was totally out on her own at that point rather than being 11 years old and motherless.
Yeah, and I think this to me is, and to my mother, of course, is a very, very important thing. And this I want to stress that, when the doctors take away all hope because they don't know about the treatments elsewhere, in the world or elsewhere in this country, they're really, in some cases, dooming, a child to be without her parent,
Yes.
And my mother is just very, very grateful that my grandpa had this contact at the Jewish Daily Forwards, and that he contacted him, and he sent my grandmother to Germany, and the rest is history. But that's part of my background. The other part of my background, and there's another story about this on my website on honestmedicine.com, is that my dad was a doctor, and my dad was a doctor who did not like what he saw happening with the medical system. And we can go into that. He actually foresaw managed care. He said he had seen so many doctors taking off patients' breasts and other parts of their bodies. And my father said it was because they needed a new car, the doctor did, or a new house. And I thought my father was kidding, but he was not. And he said someday people are going to come in to rein these doctors in, and he foresaw managed care. So I was basically in the position where you would have thought when my husband was diagnosed with a cancerous brain tumor at the age of 40 that I would have just hopped right into research mode, wouldn't you?
You would think so, yeah.
But
How long did it take and what finally motivated you to the point where, okay, I'm really going to look and see if this really is the case, if it's as bleak as they're telling me?
You know what? I have to tell you that I'm kind of embarrassed, but I'm not embarrassed because I know that what I'm about to say happens all the time. The most savvy and the most, educated people. When you hear the diagnosis of cancer, and frankly, I had just been married. We had just been married for 5 years. And my husband, as you pointed out earlier, was 40 years old. And I was terrified. And so my father was no longer alive to say, hey, Jewel, don't do just what the doctors say. But we did. And you know what? With a tumor the size of an orange, he could not have had just herbs or anything. We needed to have surgery.
Right.
He also had chemo and radiation. It took me, are you ready for this? About 3 years before I said, ooh, my husband is surviving in spite of the chemo and the radiation, because he was starting to get every side effect and every complication. A radiation caused stroke, hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain. He had to have different operations to go in and fix these things. He had tons of seizures. And I finally got the message. And I said, you better do some research. And so I did.
You're
And
listening
it,
to This Week in America. Our guest on the program is Julia Schopick. That's Schopick. The book we're talking about is an Amazon bestseller, and it's literally helped over 100,000 people worldwide. It's called Honest Medicine: Effective, Time-Tested, Inexpensive Treatments for Life-Threatening Diseases, including multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, liver disease, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and other diseases. Her website is honestmedicine.com. And it's interesting because once you started doing research, and I remember reading that at Silverlawn you came up with, and you said this could work, and literally it worked overnight, but it was met with great skepticism, and you even said hostility when you took this word to the doctors. You thought they were going to be really excited because here's another tool in the toolkit to try to get your husband well, and they sort of resented you for going around them and coming in with this.
They actually said, you'll love this. I'm saying this a bit sarcastically when I say you'll love this. They said to me, one of them, I was wondering, why are they all shying away from me? Here, what happened, Rick, was that my husband's suture line did not heal. And this was 10 years later. This was in 2001. And he had a recurrence, and I could go into the fact that usually recurrences come much earlier. His didn't, thanks to a lot of the innovative treatments like, nutritional supplements and diet. But this time, his suture line would not heal. And he ended up having 8 additional surgeries in the vain attempt to find 2 pieces of skin that would hold together. And then finally, as you just pointed out, through a PR client, I learned about Silverlawn. And Silverlawn is pieces of material, and it's impregnated with silver ions, and it's a long story. It's in Honest Medicine. It's in my book about how I convinced the doctor to let us try it. He was in the hospital, and they usually don't allow you to bring, new treatments in.
Right.
They don't like that, but we did. And the day after, it was obvious this was the first time his suture line was finally healing. And this is the point at which one of the doctors, I wondered why they were kind of avoiding me, And one of the doctors told me, he came over to me and he said, we don't think it was what you found, and he had the accent on you, that is healing your husband's skin. And I was kind of surprised, I said, well, what do you think it was, doctor? He said, we think it was the vancomycin. And vancomycin is the IV antibiotic that Tim had been on for at least 6 weeks. And I said, vancomycin, he's been on it for at least 6 weeks. And the doctor said, yes. He said, we know that. But vancomycin is like that. It kicks in.
Okay. Totally discounting what you had done and the effects of the Silverlawn.
Yeah, there's a phrase in Latin that lawyers use. My husband was a lawyer, mirabile dictu. It means miracle to say. On the very day that we put the silver on his head, vancomycin chooses that day to kick in, So that's when I knew, Rick, that I had to do something. Here, we were doing things right for several years, doing all these treatments. They didn't even acknowledge that it was the treatments that I had found, that made him live so much longer. And here was a blatant example in my mind of here was something that literally saved his life. There's no doubt about it. He would have died. He had 8 additional surgeries, as I said, and he was getting weaker and weaker and more disabled. And they still did not want. And the bad thing, the worst thing, to pretend it wasn't my husband, there are loads of people with brain tumors, especially if they've had radiation, years earlier, that their suture lines do not heal. When they have a new operation, it just won't heal.
Right.
So by not being interested, I felt that the doctors were literally keeping other people from living, from surviving. And that's pretty bad in my opinion. So I vowed that it was terrible. We were so alone when Tim was ill. I was there doing all the research by myself, and obviously, I could have used some help. So that's what I vowed, with first my blog with honestmedicine.com, and then with my book. I vowed to help people find out about doctor probably won't know
Well, and
about.
it's working. As I said, over 100,000 people worldwide have been helped by the book Honest Medicine. It's available Amazon, of course, and you can get all the information at Julia's website, which is honestmedicine.com. It's an award-winning website. Time going by too quickly. A few minutes left in the program. We'll have Julia back to talk more on the story, but I want to leave people with the research, because for some that's sort of a daunting task now. When you started this research, talk briefly about where you were able to get the research, because you didn't pull out the computer and sit there and pull up information. You had to what libraries and places like that to get research?
Boy, what an interesting question. I really love that you come up with questions like that. The truth is, now this is great. In 1990, when he was first diagnosed, the computer was not, really the thing. I mean, I did do some research on computer, but really, talking to people and all that kind of thing. But in 2001, when he had the recurrence, I was using the internet. And boy, you're bringing up a great point, because I put together a beautiful packet of information for the doctors on all these healing modalities. I found it fascinating. And by that time, by the way, Rick, I had learned how to, the way to put it is separate the wheat from the chaff. Online you can find so much bad information, but you can also find so much good information. So I put together a research project, and remember, I was a PR and still am a PR consultant, so it looked pretty darn good. I have to admit.
Yes.
And there's one criticism of it that I have, and when I counsel patients, coach them about how to approach their doctors about a treatment, I tell them, don't put as much information as I did into that package.
Interesting.
Because,
so too much information can work against you.
Well, I don't think they read it. And this was heartbreaking, because they had a patient who was dying. So luckily, I bumped into Dr. Carlos Reyes, whom I met on behalf of one of my clients, and he told me about Silverlawn, and he told me that he's a holistic doctor, integrative doctor, and he used it routinely on patients with diabetic wounds and burns. And he said to me, it's FDA approved for all non-healing wounds, and what your husband's suture line is kind of like a burn, because it's the result of radiation that it won't heal. And he said, I bet it will work on Tim, and it did. And so I really want to help other people, because we were very much alone.
Honest Medicine is the name of the book. Julia Schopick, our guest on the program. The website is honestmedicine.com. A minute or so left in the program. One of the things you really encourage people to do is to listen to their own intuition.
Yes.
Talk about how important that is, because sometimes we fight it because we're thinking, okay, this is really not rational. And you're saying listen to the intuition and give it an honest hearing.
Yeah. And that's a very dicey subject in a sense, because in the beginning, often you'll go to the doctor, you have an infection, the doctor gives you an antibiotic, it works, period, the end. But more often, especially today, and especially with things like autoimmune diseases, which we spoke about last time when I was on,
yes,
they're not finding the answers. And too many patients wait until it's, I don't want to say too late, because it's never too late. But in the case of some of the patients profiled in Honest Medicine in my book, the patients had already gotten some side effects that were serious and not retrievable from the treatments that they had been on, the toxic treatments. So when it looks like something isn't working that your doctor is doing, please listen to your gut. Go outside the box, talk to people, do online research. And one day I'm going to conduct a teleseminar on how to do online research, because there is a way to separate the wheat from the chaff. And, it's not good to learn about how to research at the time when you're faced with a big problem. You really should know about it earlier.
So many more things that we will talk about with Julia when she's back on the program, and how to find out if it's snake oil or the real deal. Also, what you do when your doctor dismisses your idea. Sometimes it's intentional. Other times they just have never heard of this. They're reluctant to try it. We'll get into that on the next program. The book really gives you the case studies of what 9 different families, 9 different patients, what they went through. Honest Medicine is the name of the book. More than 100,000 people worldwide have been helped. Effective, time-tested, inexpensive treatments for life-threatening diseases. A world of information at the website. It's why it's an award-winning website. It's honestmedicine.com. And, of course, you can link on to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link there directly onto Julia's website. Julia, we got a little further in the story here today. We got so many great things that we want to talk about. Great in the sense that these are really life-saving bits of information you're giving people. Going all the way back to your grandparents that were able to add 11 years to your grandmother when the Mayo Clinic said, "We're sewing you up, go home, it's over with. We can't do anything."
Yeah, wasn't that a great story?
That was a great story. And then with the Dr. Mayo, and all of a sudden she's sending New Year's cards out to him and not getting anything back. And she realized she's outlived the guy who said she was going to be the one that was going to be the first to go. It's a great story. Many more like that at the website, honestmedicine.com. Julia Schopick, our guest on the program. If you go to Google that, that's Schopick. You're listening to This Week in America. Of course, all the information available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us.